Su Excelencia la ex-présidente de la République de Chile, Monsieur l'ambassadeur désigné du Chili au Canada, Monsieur le consul général du Chili à Montréal, Monsieur le consul général des États-Unis à Montréal, Madame la sous-ministre adjointe, distingués invités, chers amis du CÉRIUM et de l'Université de Montréal. Ce soir, nous allons parler de paix, de réconciliation, de respect des droits de la personne, et ça m'amène à souligner que l'Université de Montréal est située en territoire autochtone traditionnel, territoire qui n'a jamais été cédé par voie de traité. Ce territoire a longtemps été un lieu de rencontre et d'échange entre les communautés autochtones ainsi qu'avec les arrivants allochtones. Et il sera encore ce soir, ce territoire, un espace d'apprentissage et de partage sur les conditions de la dignité humaine. Nous avons le privilège d'accueillir aujourd'hui une grande figure de la lutte pour les droits de la personne, Mme Michelle Bachelet. Mme Bachelet a été élue à la présidence du Chili à 2 reprises avant d'occuper le poste de Haute-Commissaire des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme de 2018 à 2022. Comme vous le savez, c'est une femme qui a joué un rôle marquant dans l'histoire récente, tout en étant un témoin privilégié de l'évolution du monde. La pensée de Michelle Bachelet a été forgée par des expériences de vie aussi signifiantes que singulières, celle de l'exil politique pendant le régime d'Augusto Pinochet, celle d'avoir été une femme dans l'enceinte du pouvoir, une véritable pionnière en Amérique latine, et celle enfin d'avoir été la voix des personnes les plus pauvres et les plus vulnérables de la planète. This is not the first time that Michelle Bachelet has visited our university. We have the honor of hosting her as a head of state in 2008 for the signing of an academic cooperation agreement on early childhood education. Then we invited her back in 2012 to receive an honorary doctorate, and so she's part of our great Université de Montréal family. Madame Bachelet, it's a great pleasure to have you with us again. I know your words will resonate deeply with our university community. Nous sommes appelés, nous aussi, à éclairer le public et les décideurs sur les tragédies qui se déroulent à Gaza, en Ukraine, au Soudan, en Haïti et dans bien d'autres régions du monde. Et ce travail d'éclairage, le Centre d'études et de recherche internationale de l'Université de Montréal le fait avec constance et avec une grande compétence depuis maintenant 20 ans. On célèbre ce soir ce 20e anniversaire. Au fil des ans, le CÉRIUM a réussi à imposer sa vision scientifique et sa crédibilité, aussi bien dans le monde de la recherche que dans le paysage médiatique et dans les cercles d'influence en relations internationales. J'en profite pour saluer le travail exceptionnel de ces chercheurs et chercheuses, et en particulier celui des anciens directeurs du CÉRIUM, Jean-François Lisée et Frédéric Mérand, ainsi que de sa directrice actuelle, Laurence Deschamps-Laporte. Si le CÉRIUM peut nous donner accès aux grandes personnalités du monde, c'est aussi en bonne partie grâce à vous, vous tous, vous toutes, grâce à votre soutien, votre présence dans les événements comme ceux-ci, mais aussi votre générosité pour plusieurs d'entre vous. La grande campagne philanthropique de l'Université de Montréal bat son plein et certains de nos projets ont été pensés pour rehausser notre capacité d'action dans le domaine des relations internationales. C'est l'heure d'être généreux envers nos étudiants, envers nos chercheurs et notre formidable CÉRIUM. Bon anniversaire, bon 20e anniversaire au CÉRIUM et bonne conférence à tous et à toutes. J'invite maintenant le doyen de la Faculté des arts et des sciences, mon collègue Frédéric Bouchard, à nous dire quelques mots.
Merci, Monsieur le recteur. Distingués invités, chers amis, Mme Bachelet, c'est un grand plaisir et un honneur pour la Faculté des arts et des sciences de l'Université de Montréal de souligner avec vous le 20e anniversaire de l'un de nos joyaux, le Centre d'études et de recherche internationale. Cela fait 2 décennies que le CÉRIUM œuvre avec brio au développement des études internationales à l'Université de Montréal, mais surtout essaie de tisser des liens entre les personnes à travers le monde qui cherchent à utiliser le savoir pour améliorer les liens entre les peuples. On a souligné le travail des anciens directeurs et de la directrice actuelle, et je me joins aux remerciements et aux félicitations du recteur pour souligner leur travail. Bien sûr, à nos nombreux chercheurs et étudiants qui sont le cœur battant du CÉRIUM, mais permettez-moi de souligner, il y a toute une équipe qui soutient cette communauté-là au quotidien, Donc, je voudrais mentionner, souvent, ce sont des personnes qui ne recherchent pas la lumière, mais je voudrais mentionner certaines des personnes qui soutiennent notre communauté du CÉRIUM au quotidien. Bien sûr, notre directrice Laurence Deschamps-Laporte, nos collègues Catherine Furlong et Christine Rothmayer, Clara Borte, Sabrina Mir, Aïcha Tari, Lucas Soleil, Alexis Montembeau-Trudel, Alexandra Parada. Je n'identifie pas toutes les fonctions et les rôles, mais en fait, la plupart des événements comme celui-ci, en fait, chacune de ces personnes y ont contribué d'une manière ou d'une autre et donc méritent nos remerciements. Je souligne ce qui est particulier au CÉRIUM, si vous connaissez un peu les centres et instituts qui œuvrent en compréhension des réalités internationales, elles ont chacun une culture ou elles ont chacun une couleur propre. Et lorsqu'on m'a demandé d'identifier quelle était celle du CÉRIUM, en fait, ce qui m'est venu immédiatement, c'est que le CÉRIUM était un remède contre le fatalisme. Le CÉRIUM parle chaque jour d'enjeux très sérieux, très graves, mais le fait d'une manière qui nous trace des voies possibles, on peut toujours éviter le pire. Et ça, donc, il n'y a pas d'angélisme, il n'y a pas de catastrophisme au CÉRIUM. Il y a surtout que chaque jour, il y a une série de petites et grandes décisions. Si on comprend un peu mieux la complexité du monde et de l'expérience humaine, on est toujours capable d'éviter le pire. Et donc, écouter les experts ou les étudiants du CÉRIUM est toujours rafraîchissant, fait toujours du bien, parce qu'on se dit qu'avec un peu de savoir, on est capable de favoriser l'épanouissement humain de manière individuelle et collective. On le fait de diverses manières, bien sûr dans notre partage d'expertise, mais avec nos écoles d'été. Chaque été, les écoles d'été du CÉRIUM permettent à des gens d'ici et d'ailleurs d'échanger les expertises d'aujourd'hui, mais aussi de construire les expertises de demain. Et donc, ces écoles d'été sont vraiment, je vous invite à examiner notre offre. Bien sûr, des événements comme celui-ci à grand rayonnement, des ateliers de discussion à différentes échelles, mais aussi un réseau de relations avec des ONG, des représentants de différents gouvernements qui permettent au CÉRIUM d'agir comme un carrefour pour que ces discussions aient lieu et éventuellement que nous trouvions les expertises et les solutions dont nous avons tant besoin. Et donc, nous célébrons ce 20e anniversaire avec beaucoup de gratitude et d'enthousiasme, mais surtout, je dirais, une impatience. On a hâte de voir la suite. Je suis convaincu qu'on n'a encore rien vu du CÉRIUM et que cet anniversaire est annonciateur de plusieurs anniversaires à venir. Et donc, pour débuter cette soirée, c'est un grand plaisir pour moi de céder la parole à la directrice du CÉRIUM, Laurence Deschamps-Laporte. Je tiens à souligner, c'est un ancien directeur du CÉRIUM, Frédéric Méran, qui à un moment donné m'a dit hey, « Il y a une personne formidable, il faut l'amener à l'Université de Montréal. » Il avait raison, mais il ne se doutait même pas à quelle échelle il avait raison. Et donc, c'est un grand plaisir de donner la parole à notre directrice, Laurence Deschamps-Laporte. Bonne soirée.
Donc, il faut que je prenne un moment pour arrêter de rougir. Je remercie le recteur Jutras, le doyen Bouchard pour leurs bons mots, mais surtout pour leur soutien inconditionnel au CÉRIUM, à sa communauté. Je remercie l'Université de Montréal dans son ensemble qui font vivre le CÉRIUM. Je suis très fière de prendre la parole et de vous parler pendant un instant du CÉRIUM, ce centre de formation, de recherche sur tout ce qui touche à l'Université de Montréal. Dans notre monde d'expertise dans l'université, c'est un électron libre assez particulier qui regroupe l'expertise à travers les disciplines de près de 150 chercheurs, fellows, postdoctorants, doctorants et communautés étudiantes. Nous célébrons aujourd'hui les 20 ans du CÉRIUM et j'ai peur qu'au cours des 20 dernières années, le monde ait beaucoup changé. Et la mission du CÉRIUM a aussi évolué pour pouvoir expliquer la complexité de ce monde. Les peuples se sont rapprochés par la technologie, les migrations, l'art, les médias. Mais c'est difficile de parler d'un ordre international qui est en santé aujourd'hui. Un certain désordre semble régner. Et aujourd'hui même, ce matin, alors que la géopolitique mondiale semble particulièrement fragile, beaucoup retiennent leur souffle en espérant que les conflits cessent de s'enflammer, que les civils cessent de souffrir. Nous réitérons ce soir l'importance de l'expertise, de la recherche, des études et de leur contribution à la connaissance de l'international. Et nous le croyons, nous le souhaitons, toute cette recherche et ce travail doivent être accessibles à la société. Nous souhaitons que nos travaux et formations contribuent à la diplomatie, à la compréhension de l'autre, afin de trouver un chemin durable vers la paix et la résolution de conflits. Nous sommes absolument honorés aujourd'hui d'accueillir Mme Michelle Bachelet, qui fut 2 fois présidente du Chili, Haute-Commissaire des droits humains à Genève. And Mme Bachelet, if I may say a couple of words about your career, which you know very well, so I will continue in French. Everything about Mme Bachelet's career is a first. Première femme ministre de la Santé au Chili en 2000, première femme ministre de la Défense en 2002, première présidente du Chili, première femme ministre de la Défense dans toute l'Amérique latine, dois-je souligner. Première présidente du Chili. Lorsqu'elle était présidente dans son premier mandat, ses contributions sont innombrables, mais elle a mis de l'avant la protection des droits humains, le soutien à l'enfance, la légalisation du mariage homosexuel, la parité dans les ministères, la création du ministère de l'Environnement, l'amnistie aux sans-papiers au Chili. Elle est devenue directrice exécutive d'ONU Femmes en 2010 et par la suite, elle fut une des très rares à obtenir un 2e mandat à la présidence du Chili qui a la particularité de ne pas, depuis la fin de la dictature, ne permet pas les mandats consécutifs. Donc, on peut s'imaginer que c'est difficile de revenir comme présidente, mais encore, elle l'a fait. Lors de sa 2e présidence en 2014, elle a contribué à la gratuité scolaire pour l'éducation supérieure pour les familles à faible revenu, à la lutte contre la violence faite aux femmes. Elle a décriminalisé l'avortement. Sa lutte pour les droits de la personne fut le combat d'une vie. C'est ce qui l'a menée à devenir Haute-Commissaire en 2018 à l'ONU. Il est, pour moi, difficile d'imaginer une personne plus inspirante pour souligner les 20 ans du CÉRIUM. Nous avons besoin d'espoir pour continuer le travail qui nous anime. Nous savons, nous, les chercheurs, que nous ne sommes pas sur les terrains à régler les conflits comme le sont de grandes politiciennes comme Mme Bachelet, mais nous souhaitons y contribuer à notre manière. Mme Bachelet, muchas gracias para ser con nosotros hoy en nuestra universidad, Universidad de Montréal. I now give you the floor. Thank you.
Monsieur le recteur de l'Université de Montréal, Monsieur Daniel Jutras, doyen de la Faculté des Arts et des Sciences, Monsieur Frédéric Bouchard, directrice de CÉRIUM, Madame Laurence de Champs-Laporte, Monsieur l'ambassadeur de Chili, autorité consulaire, Madame, Monsieur, et si vous me le permettez, mes chers amis. Merci beaucoup de votre invitation à partager avec vous aujourd'hui dans le cadre du 20e anniversaire du Centre d'études et de recherche internationales de l'Université de Montréal, mieux connu sous le nom de CÉRIUM. Mon français n'est pas très bon, so I will continue in English. For me, it's very special to return to this university, Mr. Rector, where in 2012, as you remember, I was awarded an honorary doctorate, which is why I feel part of this community. I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of this anniversary of the center, which plays a crucial role within the University of Montreal in analyzing, studying, and understanding the issues that shape the world today. Comment lutter pour le respect des droits de la personne dans un monde fragmenté? Well, it's a difficult question. That is the question that I will try to address today. Though it's not an easy issue, there are no easy solutions, and probably to many of these questions we don't have the answers yet. We are living in dangerous and complex times. The world faces multiple crises, deepening divisions and fragmentations of the geopolitical landscape. To address the root causes of this erosion of trust, we need to reinforce cooperation between governments and revitalize the multilateral system. I would like to recall a quote from Secretary General Guterres, who said, "We have the opportunity and the obligation to remember the promise of the United Nations Charter, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. We must keep this promise with the help of a revitalized, effective, representative, and inclusive multilateralism." Last Friday, the General Assembly commemorated 30 years of the day when Rwanda woke up to a shocking horror. Over 1 million lives were snuffed out in a mere 100 days. Millions more were displaced as refugees fleeing for their safety. At the present, after October the 7th, Hamas attacks on Israel, over 33,000 Palestinians, mostly women and children, are dead. 75,000 or more are injured, and at least 7,000 are presumed dead under the rubble. Over 1,200 are dead in Israel and hundreds injured. More than 100 hostages remain in captivity. And according to Save the Children, more than 1,300 children have been killed in Gaza, and over 12,000 children have been injured. Moreover, people are starving in Gaza. Oxfam reported that people in northern Gaza have been forced to survive on an average of 245 calories a day since January. We knew that this conflict in Gaza was not going to be resolved soon, but we never thought we would witness this kind of violence and cruelty towards civilians. We have to address the violations of international law committed since October 7th, including gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law, as well as the killing of civilians in Gaza. I have always been in favor of the two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, and I have insisted that this is the only possibility to bring long-lasting peace and stability to the region. Unfortunately, the tension is strongly rising throughout the Middle East. The United Nations and many countries have expressed their concern and have made a persistent call for peace and respect for human rights. Yet there has been no response, and the risk of further atrocity crimes is high. Yesterday, as per Israel's request, a special meeting in the Security Council was convened after Tehran launched its aerial attack as retaliation for an airstrike on its consulate in Damascus on April the 1st. And this situation has risen the level of tension in the region. We need to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East and avoid a new conflict in the region. We also have the war in Ukraine, which has been going on for more than 2 years. Amidst massive destruction and ongoing shelling and missile attacks across the country. More than 10,500 civilians have been killed, and more than 20,000 have been injured. Millions of people have been displaced. This war has generated repercussions in the food, fuel, and financial crisis all over the world. Also, 2024 marks 10 years of occupation by the Russian Federation in Crimea. In addition to the conflicts mentioned, we also need to recall the situation in other regions, such as South Sudan, Myanmar, Haiti, the Sahel, and many others around the world. This situation pains me and deeply concerns me. The international system that we rely on to protect human rights is under threat. There is no lack of international norms, but it is a disregard for the rules as well as lack of compliance and implementation. Every time a country overlooks these universal and globally accepted principles, someone pays the price. And that price is people's lives, particularly the most vulnerable ones. The world today experiences multiple crises that reinforce each other. The struggles are not new, but their increasing complexity has created a situation of institutional perplexity. The Global Human Development Index, HDI, has declined for the first time in modern history. And so for the first time in history, we could say we have evidence that progress embodied in human development and prosperity is going backward. This developmental setback has been joined by an increase in inequality and polarization. As these threats grow, uncertainty also grows, flooding our present. So we cannot meet the challenges of this century with the tools of another era. As the world emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic, grappling simultaneously with the climate crisis, protracted debt, and food and energy emergency, it is clear that such global challenges are far too great for any one nation to handle alone. The only hope is to find a multilateral solution. Multilateralism is working, but it has not been effective or fast enough. We need a new multilateral confidence for the present. Urgent systemic and structural transformation is needed to address multiple global and intersecting crises through international cooperation, solidarity, and a multilateral system that safeguards democracy and human rights and preserves the dignity of individuals and communities for future generations. However, action must be taken now and through the multilateral instruments and actors of the present. Civil society, especially women and excluded people from the Global South, need to be part of framing and leading debates on this transformation. The current structures makes women the most susceptible to violence. Their knowledge and lessons learned must be used to reach an end to this situation. Emerging threats and a clarified understanding of the impact of other crises imply that reform multilateralism needs to embrace an integrated approach to peace and security. It should also take into consideration international developmental institutions and processes outside the United Nations that are failing to adequately respond to pressing global needs, especially those of the developing world. There are serious deficits in balancing responsibility and consequences. As a result of these imbalances, the world's confidence in multilateral institutions is low and falling rapidly. We need a multilateral system in the present that is capable of creating a vision for the future, ready to address the political, economic, environmental, and technological changes of our world. Uncertain futures need agile multilateral institutions that can rapidly adapt to emerging threats, but also unprecedented opportunities for peace and security. We know that multilateral institutions, especially the Security Council, have struggled to address the scale of the challenges they face. The Security Council needs to be reformed, and this involves not only its composition and decision-making mechanism, but also re-evaluating the Council's role in addressing conflicts and promoting peace and security in a way that reflects the interests and perspective of all member states, particularly those that have been marginalized in the past. We suffer from a loss of global trust. It has become increasingly more challenging to discuss reforms to multilateral governance by highlighting the urgent need to address the global debt crisis and the scarcity of resources for social development, which have reversed progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. The crisis of trust is also affecting democracies in my region and around the world. Democratic backsliding is an overwhelming fact of contemporary global politics. Populism offers the promise of rapid solution to complex problems while undermining and eroding the institutional checks and balances necessary for durable democracy. Democracies are failing to deliver, causing citizens to lose faith in democratic institutions. We have a collective responsibility to enhance democratic governance and increase effective political participation for all, especially for groups who have been historically disadvantaged and excluded, or that face political, cultural, or socioeconomic barriers. For this reason, I would like to make an urgent call to re-embrace the 2030 Agenda. This agenda is a plan of action for the people, for the planet, and our common prosperity. We need to recommit to freeing the human race from the tyranny of poverty and want, and healing and securing our planet. We need to take the bold and transformative steps urgently needed to shift the world into a just, inclusive, and sustainable place. In this collective journey, we need to strongly commit to the task that truly no one will be left behind. And this commitment has to be taken now. I cannot stress enough the importance of addressing poverty. as a cornerstone of our collective efforts towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. A multilateral faith in the present requires that we give poverty our close attention. Although extreme poverty has since returned to pre-pandemic levels worldwide, the gap between the rich and poor countries, the rich and the poor, continues to widen as a consequence of various factors, including slow economic growth, rising inflation, and rising costs of food and gas. We must acknowledge poverty as a multifaceted challenge that requires urgent and concerted action as it persists in various forms, affecting individuals, families, and communities worldwide, and disproportionately impacting the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. Women and girls face exacerbated deprivation throughout their life course due to the persistent gender inequality in all spheres of life. We cannot keep asking for their patience. Multilateral institutions must address their suffering today. I emphasize that if we continue with the current trends, the attainment of SDG 1 will not be possible. Numbers indicate that 575 million individuals will still be living in extreme poverty by the year 2030. However, we must not be caught by the myth that we cannot face this challenge together. Poverty is not inevitable. Through multilateral cooperation, the world has dreamed and can still dream of achieving prosperity for everyone, especially those who have been historically abandoned by national and international institutions. I say this so we can dream that financing for poverty eradication addresses the broader range of women's human rights and the root causes for gender equality. To create confidence in the multilateral system, we must place gender at its core. As the Secretary General states, achieving gender equality and empowering women and girls is the unfinished business of our time and the greatest human rights challenge in our world. Women and girls represent half of the world's population and therefore also half of its potential. Gender equality, besides being a fundamental human right, is essential to achieve peaceful societies with full human potential and sustainable development. The root and structural causes of economic inequality within and between countries are grounded in the global, regional, and national economic and political systems. Today, people everywhere suffer from increasingly acute socioeconomic challenges with escalating inflation and cost of living, erosion of living standards, and a global food crisis that threatens food security. So the world needs a coherent, ambitious, and effective system of international public finance to respond to the multiple challenges it faces in 2024 and beyond. We need to work towards a more effective and fair global financial architecture that delivers more of the right kind of money in the right way on an ongoing and more predictable basis. We need to improve the integration of human rights obligations and political commitments into economic policies to yield better outcomes for people and the planet. The human rights and humanitarian crisis have caused some to question the effectiveness of the human rights framework as a model for protection and for positive change. But it is important to restore confidence in global multilateral institutions. This challenge, as I have said, demands reorienting our hopes toward the present. The crisis in confidence in this institution mirrors the trust gap afflicting so many societies. A new orientation for reform multilateralism will require rebuilding trust among states. Unilateralism has no place in the 21st century. Upholding human rights consistently across the board, no matter who the victims are or where the rights violations are committed, is the only way to build the world we want to live in. Everywhere and every time human rights are violated, it is an emergency that cannot be postponed. At a time of significant international tension and change, we need more multilateralism, not less. We need a stronger multilateralism system for the present. New technologies have become one with the texture of our present. It is critical that the multilateral phase for the present inspires responsible artificial intelligence governance frameworks that prioritize human rights, equality, and sustainability. It's also crucial to recognize that the widespread adoption of artificial intelligence in sustainable development efforts must also exacerbate existing inequality if not accompanied by appropriate safeguard and intervention. It is imperative to address these challenges through ethical, human-centered, inclusive, and equitable approaches to artificial intelligence governance, ensuring that the benefits of artificial intelligence are shared, equitable, and the vulnerable groups are not left behind. There's another threat to humanity today, the triple planetary crisis: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. With each passing day, our collective delays and inaction bring us closer to an alarming global catastrophe. This is something I've spoken about with great emphasis throughout my career, especially in my times as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. This is a crisis that we cannot ignore. It is affecting us. It is affecting the lives of millions of people around the world, and it's our responsibility to take charge. Concrete action is paramount to our very survival. In the last 20 years, the number of climate-related disasters has almost doubled, according to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. We are at a point where mitigation is not longer enough, but we must adapt, because the problem it causes are already a reality. In fact, at COP28 last year, the parties reached a historic agreement on the first day, the creation of a loss and damage funds. States must implement their international commitment and increase their efforts to fulfill them. We will all suffer far worse effects from environmental crisis if we do not work together. To confront these challenges and build a world where the rights and dignity of all are respected and protected, we need to work together. Decisive and coordinated action is needed. Regional integration and cooperation, essential to our collective success, will only be possible if there is a true desire to work together, overcoming historical mistrust and political differences. Finally, the Summit of the Future in September 2024 is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to enhance cooperation on critical challenges and address gaps in global governance, reaffirm existing commitments, including to the Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Charter, and move towards a reinvigorated multilateral system for the present that is better positioned to impact people's lives positively. Dear friends, universities like this and centers like CÉRIUM have a key role to play, because you are committed to academic excellence, innovative research, the training of professionals, and service to society. Universities train critical, creative citizens committed to democracy, and it's the place where you can promote the importance of global cooperation and collaboration. We must recognize that the path forward is not an easy one, so the call to action is clear. We must drive significant change in the way we address common challenges, opting for greater solidarity and a more unified approach. As Desmond Tutu used to say, I am too a prisoner of hope. I believe we must have faith in what we can achieve through joint efforts, though the task is as complex as it has ever been. We must continue working with courage and the conviction that a life built on respecting and promoting human rights is something truly worth fighting for. Notre dévouement à cette cause façonnera l'avenir de notre monde, déterminant si nous vivons dans une société marquée par la division et l'injustice ou dans une société caractérisée par l'unité, le respect et la dignité pour tous. Merci beaucoup à tous. Should I go down or here? Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Je crois que voilà. Ce n'est pas tâche facile de parler de droits humains, mais que toute la salle finisse avec un sourire d'espoir. Madame Bachelet, you accomplish the great challenge of filling us with hope and optimism in truly these difficult times. So if I may, I have a couple of questions for you. And no, this is not CPAC, but it might sound like it because I will switch back and forth. Et ensuite, nous allons donner la parole à certaines de nos étudiantes qui ont envoyé des questions en avance. Donc, la montée des groupes et des partis populistes à l'échelle mondiale a été établie comme une tendance politique qui marque notre époque. Ces courants s'attaquent, entre autres, à la légitimité de l'ONU Comment pouvons-nous contribuer comme chercheurs, citoyens, à rétablir la confiance en ces institutions? Indeed, Mme Bachelet, I would be delighted to hear on how everyday citizens, scholars, can contribute to really to the legitimacy of the UN and changing this declining reputation of multilateral institution at this time when populism is on the rise and political scientists have established this rise to be quite the trend of our time.
Oh, thank you very much. I think that, first of all, the multilateral system has to show that it's being relevant. That's something we discussed when I was at the High Commission as well. Because it's like democracy. If it's not relevant, why should people believe that democracy is the best system? Huh? So I think the multilateral system needs to improve the way they're solving problems. Having said that, it's not as easy. It's not easy because it depends on many different wills, if I may say. Huh? Many people have to be convinced that it's important to bring solutions to the problems. One of the things that the UN, typically people think of the UN as the functionaries of the UN, but the UN is 193 member states, and the Security Council 15 member states. So it's for them, and every council has another number of members. But I would say what can be done to support, maybe, and as I said in my words, that multilateralism is working, but it has not been as effective or agile or fast as we would like to. But I think one thing that universities and researchers could do, for example, is to, first of all, acknowledge when there have been good results, but also acknowledge what could have happened if the UN was not there, because it would be much worse. And I think also that to acknowledge that sometimes the UN doesn't have in their hands the solution of everything, but what will happen if nobody will be standing for those people who don't have voice, if they wouldn't be standing for those people whose human rights are being violated? And the other thing that I think you could do, as I said before, is the contribution of the formation of young people that can really understand the power of cooperation of solidarity, to be able to, I would say, address these global challenges. But I do believe, though, that there is some needs for transformation and reforms to be able to, if I would say, solve certain situations that doesn't permit many times to be as agile as needed.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to get scolded for playing with the technology. It's working. All right. No, I think that's very useful what you're saying in terms of what scholars can do and contribute. Je crois que souvent, nous formulons nos critiques constructives dans l'espoir de rendre ce qui est bien meilleur. Mais si nous ne prenons pas le temps de souligner l'importance de ce qui existe déjà, on ne peut pas prendre pour acquis qu'il y a une l'unanimité par rapport à la nécessité de préserver ces institutions. Et je pense aussi que ce qui a peut-être aidé récemment, c'est que l'ONU a aussi fait certains efforts d'ouvrir ses portes aux populations. Par exemple, je sais que nous avons des délégués à l'Université de Montréal, étudiants qui se rendent, par exemple, à la commission du statut de la femme, entre autres avec le soutien du gouvernement du Québec pour leur déplacement, et de le vivre, d'être sur le plancher, d'être si proche de ces décisions, ça peut aussi changer des vies, créer des vocations. I started talking about the status of women at the UN and their high-level week. Maybe let me go to gender rights and women's rights. I think on the last International Women's Day, Secretary General Guterres said that it will take 300 years to attain gender equality. You mentioned it in your speech. The setback we're currently facing. What can be done specifically on women's rights? Can this decline be slowed down? How can the UN or the Commission on Human Rights, what can they do? How can we support them in fighting this setback?
Well, I think there's many resolutions that go in the right direction, but we need not only resolutions, we need action by member states. Because many resolutions are very good, but there's no implementation of it in the national level. So there are some more, if I would say, global challenges. There are this sort of trend trying to not give importance to gender equality. That is also reflected, for example, in something that for me is really surprising. Having been Executive Director of UN Women when it was created, where the word gender was really used everywhere, and now you don't find the word gender in resolutions. So somebody won that battle against gender equality. So I think member states should reflect on that, and I hope that the summer summit for the future could be an opportunity, even though I haven't read the draft, but I haven't said that there's nothing about gender. I mean, it's supposed to be transversal, but you know, when it's transversal, it disappears usually. When it's supposed to be everywhere, it's nowhere. So it's not accidental, I think. But anyway, so what we need, I think we need, first of all, yes, the UN and the Secretary General has done a lot, for example, in all high-level positions. He put 50% of women in all heads of mission of peacekeeping or in agencies. So to give the clear symbol that women are capable, competent, and can play important roles. The Council of Human Rights have done lots of resolutions on gender equality, but also not only in general, but also in particular. For example, in Afghanistan, where women has, you know, their rights have declined so dramatically, and girls are not able to go to school. So many resolutions have done, many, if I would say, words of support for women's rights are there. But we need to work even stronger on that. But I also believe that we need more women in decision-making position. We need more women with gender perspective. Not every woman has gender perspective. There are women who don't believe in gender equality.
Doesn't come at birth.
No. No. So it's not any women. We need people who really understand that women's rights are not always respected, and then people who don't naturalize what is not natural, that don't normalize what is not normal. Because maybe in old patriarchal societies, many things were normal, but not anymore, you know? So slavery was normal, and we don't want slavery. So we need to look at that. I think we need to also work at the UN level, but we also need to support, and member states, and particularly donors, need to support women's organizations. Grassroots organization. I mean, you do it from the UN, but also you have to do it bottoms up, because it's at their country, in their national level, where governments are going to take decisions to open spaces for women or not. So, and you know what? The whole support of financial support for women's organizations all over the world is the same as the cost of one F-16. So clearly,
again, the funding for all women's organizations, le financement pour tous les organismes pour les droits des femmes dans le monde, c'est le prix d'un avion F-16.
16, yes.
Quand même.
So it's like 0.0 something of the GDP of the world. So clearly we can give more money for women's organizations, isn't it? So, and I said that because it's true that we need both things. We need international institutions to stand up and step out and speak up for women's rights, but also we need to support the organizations on the ground and at the different levels of women, so they can also raise their voices to demand their rights.
Merci beaucoup. I think what my students would say is it's a mic drop moment, but please don't drop it. Alors, si je peux me permettre, je vous ramène dans les Amériques. On prend un pas de recul par rapport aux organisations internationales et au multilatéralisme. Je m'interroge sur la politique étrangère québécoise et canadienne. And often in Quebec and Canada, we tend to look to our southern neighbors, the United States, to our European allies within NATO, namely. And we are on this continent, in the Americas, and there is surely more to do with our Latin American cousines plutôt, peut-être. How could we strengthen our diplomacy in the Americas, and perhaps specifically Quebec, Canada, and Chile?
Yeah, maybe people here doesn't know that Canada, even though it's located geographically in the Americas, in the UN structure is not in the Americas, it's in WEOC, it's in Western European countries, and Canada, and of course also Japan, the US, Japan, and I'm not sure if the Republic of Korea is in the WEOC. No, I think so, not. But anyway, so I'm telling you this because the UN is organized in a different way. It's not it's geographically everywhere else, but in this case, it's a different kind of structure and organization. And I think it's really important that Canada continues being a very important ally of the US, of course, and Europe, because you share values and principles and so on. But I think it's really important for Canada to be able to develop a more active role in diplomatic relations, but not only diplomatic, I mean in all kinds of relationship with Latin America and the Caribbean countries. Because it's your part of the world. Because many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean also share the same values and principles. Or they need support to be able that those people who do share can have the support to be ensuring that those principles are the ones that are the main principles in the society. Particularly also in this context that I'm really concerned about is the weaknesses on some democracies and the rising of far-right groups who are putting in risk democracy in Latin America and the Caribbean as well, mainly Latin America, if I may say. So Canada, with its experience of a democratic country, can also be supportive supportive politically, maybe as a donor in many situations, but also as a model to follow. I mean, I know no country is perfect. Probably people here can criticize a lot of things of their own countries. I went to the Nordic countries, and where in Latin America we always believe that Nordic countries are perfect, etc. And of course, meeting with NGOs, everybody was complaining and so on. But I mean, at a different level, of course, of the complaint that you can have elsewhere. So, but I think there can be really interesting sharing of experiences. We had the possibility of learn a lot on peacekeeping operation through an MOU that we signed with Canada while I was Minister of Defense, and we did a lot of things together. We also went together with the US and France in Haiti the first time there was a terrible situation there. So I think there are experiences that can be improved.
I think recently Canada and Chile chaired the Equality Coalition on LGBTQ2 rights as well.
Yes, also. So there are good experiences, but I think if I may say it in a more global way, I think the Global South is looking forward to see the North a little bit closer and a little bit more engaged with the problems of the South and the support of Canada in this case in how to deal with those challenges.
Thank you.
So when you ask me how, when there is political will, there is a way.
We'll send you to Ottawa tomorrow in Quebec City. No, you have some good ideas, and I think we shouldn't forget our own continent in terms of building stronger diplomacy. Merci. Peut-être je donne un petit regard à mes collègues. Une dernière question de ma part avant qu'on passe aux étudiantes, et c'est vraiment sur le rôle des universitaires et des étudiants, sur le rôle de la recherche. It is obvious, you said in your speech, we cannot sound Pollyannish or naive. This is a hard, difficult time for international relations. We always think we traverse a specific historic moment as we live it. I tend to think, regardless, there's data that shows that conflicts are at a high point in history. This is not something to rejoice over, but perhaps if you have any ideas on what the university community, what scholars can do to contribute to peace building, to reconciliation, to slowing down this multiplication of conflicts?
Well, sometimes when you are in charge of something, you don't have too much time to study situations, because you have to be taking decisions, making things, doing things. So maybe what university can do is sort of look at, through research, of good experiences and bad experiences, and why this happened in terms of peacekeeping operation, but also peace building initiatives, what works and what doesn't work. And I think that could be, and what can be the lessons learned that can be used. I mean, in the UN, they're doing a lot of research on this, but I think the possibility that the universities have to have contact with different actors in those contexts and identifying what could be the positive, which the spoilers are many times, and how you can find, and which are the strategies that work better. Because there has been all kinds of experiences, good experiences and bad experiences, and we need to learn from the good experiences so that can be sort of implemented elsewhere to be able to ensure more peace and security, but also to identify early on the risk that could go into peace and security problems. Let me give you an example. When I was High Commissioner, I went to some countries of the Francophonie. I went in Africa, I went to Burkina Faso and to Niger. And when I went to Burkina Faso, I started looking, the situation was very complicated at that time. I'm talking December 2021. And I talked to many different actors, I mean, the government, and I read the newspapers, and I found out there was a lot of conflict, political conflict, because of the problems in the borders with these terrorist groups and people trying, and that they killed a lot of people, and the mayors, and so on, these terrorist groups. And the government seemed alone, if I may say, didn't have the support. So I started feeling, probably because of my political experience, that it could come a coup d'etat. So I went to talk to the UN group, and I said to them, don't you fear a coup d'etat? No way, they told me, no way. No, not at all. This cannot happen. Then I went in my visit to the National Commission of Human Rights in Burkina, I asked them, I feel something strange. Ain't you feeling that it could be a coup d'etat? The same thing. No, not at all. Okay. I talked to the president, and I gave him some recommendation, things he asked me, based on my experience, not based on UN experience, but political experience. But I saw how fragile the situation was. But everybody thought I was crazy. 2 weeks later, there was a coup d'etat in Burkina Faso. When I went to Niger, it was different, because the president has the same problems that the other, not the president, the country, but the opposition was understanding that it was a common challenge, was not trying to push down the government. So at that time, there was not a coup d'etat. 2 years later, there was a coup d'etat. And I have to say this because one of the risks of democracy is not only coup d'etat.
I mean, not only what we were seeing in Europe or Latin America. In Africa, we haven't seen this rising of extreme right movements and populist movement, but we have seen like 9 different countries with coup d'etat. That is also a way, I mean, not a way, it also means that the democracy has been killed, if I may say. So that's why I say that sometimes people who are so involved in the system do not see what for me was obvious, because I came from with fresh eyes. I could put together a lot of information, and I really felt that there was a real risk of coup d'etat in Burkina at that time. And sometimes you feel that international community don't look at those things. So maybe universities can help in that as well.
Well, you've inspired us to continue our work. Thank you so much, Mme Bachelet. I will now call on some students, des étudiantes qui ont contribué certaines questions. Je dois noter qu'il y avait un grand nombre d'étudiants qui ont soumis des questions. On ne peut pas tous les inviter, mais prenez bien note, Mme Bachelet, that if you do desire to come back and teach a summer school, there is interest. Okay? So we will be available for you if you want to come back for a week. A little bit sunnier with festivals in Montreal next time if you come during the summer school season. So I will now, je vais inviter Katrina Swiderska, qui est étudiante à la maîtrise en sciences politiques, à poser sa question, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Laurence. Hi, Mme Bachelet. On ressent de plus en plus de scepticisme dans la population sur la capacité des institutions internationales à promouvoir et protéger les droits de la personne. Comment est-ce qu'on peut inspirer un engagement renouvelé de ces institutions en faveur de la justice et de la dignité humaine autour du monde? I'll switch to English for more clarity. So there is growing public skepticism about the ability of international institutions to promote and protect human rights. How could we inspire a renewed commitment by these institutions to justice and human dignity around the world? Thanks a lot.
I would love to have the answer to your question. Huh? I mean, I tried to speak a little bit on my words on this. When I was High Commissioner, I thought the pandemic will produce the same effect of the 2 world wars that brought in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was possible because the world at that time decided that they want to leave those terrible things again. So they decided to have minimal civilizatorium principles and values for all, you know? And that's how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was born. And it was interesting, and I have to say this because many people doesn't know that there were parts of the declaration that were due to people from the South. For example, the one who spoke about, because at that time, it was called the les droits de l'homme. It was not the droits de personne, it was the droits de l'homme. And there was an Indian activist.
Some countries still say that, but not us.
Well, when I went to France as a UN Executive Director of UN Women, in Parliament, I proposed to change that. And they said that the French Royal Academy would not accept that. So it's okay. But what I mean to say is that, so there was this Indian woman who said, no, we cannot put it that way, because otherwise government will use it against women's rights. So there was Chilean who were very important, Peruvian, Chinese, I mean, people from different parts of the world that at that time were part of the UN. African countries, the majority at that time were colonies, so they were not independent countries part of the UN. But why I'm telling you this is because I think, and I mentioned it, the UN, that all of these conventions, norms, rules have been approved by all member states. So it's not that we are lacking of frameworks, rules, norms. We're lacking of this regard for it. We're lacking of lack of compliance and lack of implementation. And if I may say it in a way, even though it's not easy to do something different, there is impunity. Because if you sign whatever and you do nothing, nothing happens to you. And I believe, though, that it will be difficult if there's no impunity, because many member states wouldn't be part of the General Assembly. If every time they sign something and they do nothing about it, they will be sort of accused or something. So you have to be realistic how the world works. But I think that some things that I mentioned, we need to reform certain structures so they work better. I mean, to be honest, this is my thought, but I think everybody who has been in charge of the UN has tried some reforms, everyone, and this Secretary General as well. And I remember Ban Ki-moon telling me when I was Executive Director, you know, Madam President, he used to tell me, Madam President, every country comes to talk to me, a member state, and tells me, we need to reform the UN, but don't touch my people there. So you see, it's very difficult, because everybody wants reform, but many people don't want to change really things. But I believe that when I thought the pandemic could provoke that sense of, we have urgencies here. Because of course it was a health crisis, but it was much more than a health crisis. It was a social, economic crisis. And we saw that the lack of solidarity between countries, the lack of solidarity at the beginning, everybody was buying whatever they needed and don't caring about the rest. The vaccines were very difficult to be distributed to poorer countries. So we saw a world where collectiveness was not, and solidarity was not what was happening. Before the pandemic, Antonio Guterres had developed, with all of us who worked in that time, what was called our common agenda. And our common agenda was exactly a document who said, look, if we continue this way, it will be bad for the humanity. If we do this other way, we are at the tipping point. So we can go the right way or we can go the wrong way. And you know, that document, and I will suggest you to read it, even though it's some years old, but it's still very valid, because it has a particularity. It's the only document was approved by all member states, all member states. So it's a very interesting document. And I hope that much of this discussion on the Summit for the Future will be about which are challenges, how we improve the way we do things, and how we really see if we need still transformative action to show the people that the UN is relevant, is doing what they need, and that will inspire them to do the best. Unfortunately, the pandemic didn't produce that. Because what people wanted after the pandemic is to go back to normal life, not realizing that normality was not a good one, because that normality meant a huge gap between countries and inside countries. So we shouldn't, that's why Secretary General said, let's build back better. But maybe afterward we thought, let's build forward better. Because to go back to that is not the solution. Because that's a world full of contradiction, inequalities that we don't want to live in. So I think, and I hope, that the Summit of the Future can be, as I said, once in a time opportunity.
Merci, Katrina. Merci, Mme Bachelet. J'aimerais maintenant inviter Fiona Wendorf, étudiante à la maîtrise en affaires publiques et internationales au département de sciences politiques, à prendre la parole.
Bonjour tout le monde, pardon. Merci Laurence. Thank you, Mme Bachelet, for your speech. Donc ma question est, dans quelle mesure votre expérience à la présidence du Chili a influencé votre travail et votre approche dans vos différents mandats à l'ONU? So to what extent has your experience as the president of Chile influenced your work at your different UN mandates? Thank you so much.
I think it helped a lot because you have political experience and you can speak to member states because you have been a member state. So you know how to deal with a lot of issues on one hand, to put yourself in the shoes of member states, try to understand their difficulties, but also try to show and support with solutions to our difficulties. As High Commissioner of Human Rights, it also helped me, having been in prison, having been in exile, so I could understand also the sufferings of many people, NGOs, situation, etc. But to be a president, to have been a president also helped me to open spaces that if you haven't been a president, sometimes they don't look at you, they don't listen to you, etc. So if I would go to a country, not every country I have to say, even though Canada, the Prime Minister did receive me, but in some other places, they just put you with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of Justice. But having been a president, particularly in the Global South, they receive you, they listen to you. You can debate, not necessarily everybody agrees with what you're saying, but you can have a very important, if I would say, experience of sharing, giving recommendations. The other thing that I would say helped me, but maybe is linked also to my personality, is that I feel that you can say anything in the right way. The tone you say things is very important, and you never should humiliate the person who is talking to you. And I learned that being Minister of the Health and having to deal with the trade unions. I mean, this is not only something that you always have, I mean, in health, the trade unions, you'll always be there. You always want to work with the doctors, nurses, all kinds. So you need to have good relations with them, even though they can be in a completely different approach of you. So the way to build good relations is to be respectful of their opinions and to try to sincerely find solutions. So the same thing I did as High Commissioner or as Executive Director of UN Women. The only thing is that the High Commissioner of Human Rights, it has like an article I was reading before going to Switzerland, and I find this article an impossible job. Because you're supposed to be the voice of the voiceless, but on the other hand, you're supposed to work with member states to support them, provide capacity building, and so on and so on. So many member states want you the second part, but not the first part of the job. But that's why I think, but sometimes it works, for example, and you have to try to think on the arguments that could convince the other person, or the president. For example, if you know a certain president is going to put into prison a woman that is very active politically, you can find ways of saying that that's not the right way to do. Or there was this president in an African country who's the man who was the oppositor in the run for a presidency, he put it into presidency, into detention. So I talked to him and explained to him in a way that I could convince him how important was to free him and how he would be seen as somebody who was able to free somebody who was an opponent. So I think it helps. First, I'm old, so I have a lot of experience, even though I used to say that I have accumulative youth, because I think youth is not a matter of the age, it's a matter of passion for things, it's a matter for caring for things, and not accepting the unacceptable. But, so I would tell you, yes, it helped me a lot. It helped me a lot, but also to try to understand the situation of some countries, the context. Because sometimes we ask some countries to be, after they have been through civil wars and not many years after their independence, to be Finland or to be Norway. And you have to understand that clearly they have not developed as much, they haven't had the time to do something. So I think it helps to try, and the other thing that helps me is that when you are in certain post and the office or whatever has a strategy, and you look at the strategy, and it's been the same strategy 5 years and has not worked at all. So to say, look, this is not working. We have to change the strategy. We have to be more realistic and find what can really work. So I think many of those experiences are helpful. So I think it did help me in terms of trying to find, because as myself, because I'm more a doer, I was not interested in being the historian of the human rights. I was interested in having results so people can improve their lives, so we can really ensure the human rights. But also, when it was needed, raise our voices and step out. Because one of the things in Myanmar, for example, is that people felt completely abandoned by the international community, and in many other places. Because everybody speaks about the big issues, the big conflicts, but there's so many conflicts all over the world. And usually, and there is this small little conflict, like between, usually in the Sahel and other places, between the farmers and the, what's the word? The
nomadic people, like the...
Oh, no, for example, the ones who have cows and all that.
The
herders. The herders and the farmers, because of not enough soil or not enough water. And they can kill, in a weekend, 300 people among these ethnic groups. So you need to understand the complexity to try to help countries to solve their problems. So I think in that sense, my whole life in different positions, not being born as a president, because nobody is born as a president, coming from down, up, helps a lot to understand different people and different possibilities, and try to help.
Beaucoup de sages leçons qu'on peut tous essayer de mettre en œuvre dans nos propres vies. Merci. Une question finale de Manon Hennequin, qui est à la maîtrise en études internationales.
Madame Bachelet, bonsoir. Une femme sera bientôt élue à la tête du Mexique. Vous avez vous-même dirigé le Chili en tant que première femme. C'est pourquoi aujourd'hui, je me pose la question suivante. Comment pouvons-nous garantir une participation égale des femmes et des minorités dans les processus de prise de décision politique à travers le monde? A woman will be elected to head Mexico next June. This will be an historic moment for the country. You were the first woman to lead Chile. How can we ensure the equal participation of women and minorities in political decision-making throughout the world? Thank you a lot.
The first thing you need to understand and see which are the obstacles for women's full participation. And in some places there are laws that constrain women. In some places are cultural barriers. So I think you need to understand this is not a single recipe for every country in the world. You need to find out in particular countries which are if I would say, the lack of the barriers for women's participation and minorities' participation, and you need to remove those barriers. You need to remove, if there are laws that are constraining women's rights, you need to change those laws. If violence is constraining women's rights, you need to eliminate violence and have a good legal framework, but also the whole system working against women's violence and children's violence. You need to identify if women, for example, I just came from Guatemala. There is a program there called Mujer Participa, Women Participate, where from 1 year to now, UN Women and the European Union are supporting women's political participation at different levels, support people in government, but also support senators or representatives, and also NGOs and people from grassroots organizations. So, and it was really interesting because you could identify many of the barriers, and you can also strengthen and supporting those women. Many women want to go into politics, many don't, but many women do want to go, but they need support, they need mentoring of other people who already have experience because many women usually feel that they're not, how you call it that they don't have the full competence. Nothing against you guys, but not many men work like that. Huh? But many women have this, I don't know the name in English or French, the syndrome de l'impostor.
Le syndrome de l'imposteur, c'est
la même chose. Syndrome d'imposteur. I was a week ago in a university in the south of Chile, in Puerto Montt, and we had this panel. And there was this woman, one of them was a teacher, mathematician of STEM and so on, a very interesting woman. And she said that when she was called to participate in the panel with me, she said, oh, maybe they got the wrong number. And she's great and bright, but you know, women tend to think, me? Why me? Maybe there's a mistake. Huh? And, but, so we need to support women that really want to be very active. And we need also, as I said before, to support women's organizations. Because one of the things that women cannot do is participate completely alone, because you need support. Particularly in many societies where women have all the double charge of being in charge of the family, sometimes of elder people. So there's, of course, of children. So one of the things that I always said to women is that when I was Minister of Defense, I used to be part of a network of women working in defense. And there was this bulletin who said, women can do all, but not all at the same time. So you need, when you want to be more active and participate, you to be or in the organization, or in the students' organization, or as a minister, or as a president, whatever, you need to understand that maybe your house will not be the house to come out in the magazine of house and decoration, because something you need to sacrifice, if I may say. You cannot be the best in everything. But if you choose to be somebody who is in a decision-making position, you need to understand that some things, maybe they're not the priority, or you can find networks that can support you. The family, or friends, or women's networks that can, or student networks that can support you on those issues. The other thing, I think mentoring is very important, because you can learn from lessons that other people have learned, so you don't make the same mistakes sometimes that other people have done already. So I think there's a lot of need for, if I would use the feminist word sorority, but if somebody doesn't like that word, you can say solidarity among women, that is needed. But also we need men in this. We need men to be convinced that the best for them as well, and for the society, is women and men to have equal opportunities. Women don't want we don't want gifts or favors. We want the same opportunities that men have. And that's it. And I think there's lots of more things that I've been talking about. I'm talking too much, so thank you very much.
Honorable Mme Michelle Bachelet, présidente, j'ai vu des enregistrements des vieux concerts des Beatles où est-ce que les Beatles ne pouvaient pas chanter parce qu'il y avait tellement de cris de foule. Il y a moins de cris, mais il y a beaucoup d'applaudissements. C'est difficile pour vous to keep speaking as everyone applauds because we are so moved by your words. It was many months in the workings that we, through the help of many colleagues, including Sarah Myriam Martin-Brûlé at the CÉRIUM, the Canadian ambassador to Chile who hosted you, many diplomatic colleagues, we reached out to your team and you said, yes, I want to be there. Now, your team was like, yeah, but she needs to go to Guatemala and this and this. You are, everyone wants your wisdom, your support, to be inspired by your presence. And I cannot thank you enough for flying all the way from Santiago to Guatemala to be with us today for this historic anniversary of our center, which is truly a community, an institution we cherish so dearly, the CÉRIUM. Merci, Mme Bachelet.
Merci à vous.
Quelques mots de conclusion, si je peux me le permettre. Je viens de le dire, mais le CÉRIUM, c'est beaucoup plus que des statuts universitaires, des locaux rénovés, certes, merci. Mais c'est une communauté de chercheurs, de fellows, de doctorants, d'étudiants, de partenaires, d'amis. Je dois remercier, le doyen l'a fait, mais je ne peux pas m'empêcher de le faire. Souvent, on parle beaucoup des professeurs, on leur donne des prix, on les cite parfois, pas assez. Mais c'est beaucoup des gens qui se dévouent à cette institution, au CÉRIUM, derrière les rideaux. Je pense à Clara, Sabrina, Aïcha, Alexandra, Rose, Lucas, Alexis. Il y a plusieurs autres noms d'auxiliaires, de stagiaires, de gens qui nous ont aidés. J'aimerais remercier ma collègue Christine Rothmayer, directrice académique du CÉRIUM cette année, Catherine Furlong, qui sera bientôt de retour. Vous pensez peut-être que c'est la fin de la saison du CÉRIUM, mais non, pour beaucoup, c'est les 15 écoles d'été qui vont commencer. Je vois plusieurs des titulaires dans la salle. On passera de l'Espagne à la Thaïlande, en passant par Montréal et bien d'autres lieux, dont l'Allemagne, où est-ce qu'on continuera nos formations terrain avec des praticiens, avec des chercheurs pour une bonne partie de l'été. Un mot tout particulier à mon prédécesseur, Frédéric Mérand, sans qui je ne serais pas ici. Il a toujours été généreux dans son mentorat, même avant que je pense à l'université. Il m'a passé le flambeau avec une bienveillance qui est assez unique dans la société, mais dans tout ce qu'on peut rencontrer dans une vie. Merci Frédéric pour ta confiance et ton aide. J'aimerais clore finalement en rappelant ce que le recteur nous a dit par rapport à la grande campagne philanthropique de l'Université de Montréal. Le CÉRIUM aussi est heureux de recevoir vos contributions. Notre projet principal, c'est de soutenir nos étudiants au cycle supérieur. Il y aura un code QR ici à la sortie. Vous avez vu, vous les avez entendus seulement 3, mais on en a beaucoup plus que ça. Puis on veut qu'ils soient capables de se découvrir comme chercheurs, de poursuivre leur vocation sans avoir à faire des compromis sur le plan financier. Les études sont de plus en plus dispendieuses. Tout type de dons, grands, petits, contribue à nos étudiants, à notre communauté. Donc, je vous remercie. Bonne soirée.